Welcome everybody to our Sunday Truth Talk here from my healing tent. My name is Jona Bryndis. I'm a living True Self Radio, and every Sunday I come to present and offer you different perspectives on energies and entities. And I think today we've hit a topic here that is very controversial and also very moving for a lot of you. Received many questions up front, and I realized very quickly that dark and light forces are something that many of you are interested in, and I've compiled a list of pretty much 20 subtopics, which made me realize I won't be able to do this all in one Sunday Truth Talk. So we're looking at part one today, and I wanted to answer or tie in the questions that seem to be of most interest to you. There is a poll here that you can continue to participate in. What is most interesting for you, and I will try to respond to that. Of course, and this is the main aspect of me doing this live, I want you to interact. I don't want you to take anything I say. I don't want you to think that I want to convince you or, show you one particular way. I'm trying to offer you a view here as a True Self Radio in my capacity as someone who has assimilated many different teachings, spiritual teachings, but also modality, psychology, as well as shamanism, and philosophy and metaphysics inside of me. And that means that, the main objective here for me to come to you on Sundays is to encourage you to interact, is encourage you to ask questions, to question these things that I'm presenting or that I'm offering here to you. So please don't feel offended. I fully admit that I am not entirely free of sarcasm or cynicism sometimes, especially because, I have to take high vibratory concepts and present them here in a, rather low vibratory environment, which means that, there's also a lot of haters and trolls and so forth, which I understand. So please feel free to correct or ask, but understand that me sharing all these things here freely, which is very unusual in and of itself, and we'll get to all of this, what is lower vibratory, higher vibratory, and why am I doing this publicly here, because it has to do with the nature of truth. And anyone who is a serious energy healer or energy coach and who understands these concepts in their actual nature will know why I'm doing this. All right, so helping people to see truth is not something that has to do with dogma or agenda. It has something to do with a skill that we as humans are currently developing. So if you look into the history of mankind, this skill wasn't always there and still isn't. The truth level of everything that is presented to us on the internet is roughly 5%, which means 95% of the information that you are being bombarded with probably throughout the day, be it through TV, through your phone, or through computer, Google, internet, and so forth, is not true. And while this kind of knowledge that I'm trying to present to you here has been esoteric in the past for a reason, namely for the reason of not stirring up sort of the superstition in people. In the past, the human collective was rather, undifferentiated and focused on sort of the day-to-day survival aspects, which binds our perception and our ability to discern. It reduces it, it filters it, all right? And therefore, higher vibratory concepts of truth, or the concepts of divine spirit source and so forth, are very iffy, okay? Because if we run against a strong manipulation, dogma, religion, and so forth, then we risk to be burned on a stake. And luckily, we don't quite have this anymore here today, but we still see the expressions and manifestations of untruth. And you've heard me talk about the confrontation with untruth and inner darkness and so many of these terms before. And today I would like to shed a little light into some of these big questions, such as, do dark and light forces exist? What are these entities and energies? What is their quality? What is their nature? Where do they come from? How do they operate? And how can I discern them? And I see this is interesting to me because even in the poll that I did up front, nobody really wanted to know if they exist. Can I ask you something, guys? Would you like to share here with me real quick in this live interaction? Is this clear to all of you, whether light and dark forces actually exist? And Canada, I see you. Denmark, I see you. Thank you guys for coming. Is the question, do light forces and dark forces exist, a question that is already answered for you as the audience here? And while you're thinking about this, I want to point out that my role here in, sort of laying all this out for you is not publicistic or anything. I'm not trying to be significant or trying to, rock anybody's boat here. It's my profession. I'm a professional energy healer and energy coach. I have various programs that help people to discern truth and to verify all this for themselves, to learn about their own energetic sensitivity, the purpose of it, and energetic reality and perception and so forth, and how to utilize all this correctly in these platforms, some of which are free, like on Skype, for instance, or here on Facebook in a Facebook group or YouTube. You can find a lot of detailed information about some of these subjects that we will cover here today. But there's also programs such as the Heart Warrior program or the Soul Self Journey or the Sacred Self Healing Community, which is the largest part of the program here, teaching people self-healing. Yeah, so it looks like there is no question about whether or not dark or light forces exist. All right, then I will not skip this question, but I will maybe answer the questions that come up in conjunction of whether or not they exist or what they actually are here in the course of my presentation. Please, again, feel free to ask at any point, whether it's here on Facebook in the live or in the YouTube video or any other publication that you might come across this live stream. So I want to first start with the different dimensions of our own existence. And this is something that needs to be clarified before we can utilize terminology, energy terminology, okay? There's a lingo out there, an energy lingo, where we talk about vibes and quantum and energies and fields and so forth. We talk about energetic vampirism and things like that. Those are all lingo terms that have sort of crept into our awareness here over the last 30 years, mostly through New Age and spiritual awakening movements here. But there's very little, I don't want to call it scientific, guys. I am an ex-scientist, and this is part of what I'm doing here, to offer you a framework that, lends itself to its scientific induction, if you will. But I do want to point out that, there is no real backup of any of these terms from any of the persons that you hear out there, with the exception of those who have dedicated their lives to studying this. And I want to point this out. Now, I'm not saying that any particular school, mystic school, teaching, religion, or anything is better than another. This would be, this would be separating, this would, create more contradiction in you than anything. And I'm not here to confirm, some of your spiritual reality or what you perceive as sort of the beings up there either. What I want to open up here for you is a roadmap with which you can verify and experience and witness all this yourself due to the power of your consciousness. And so when I talk about truth training, when I talk about consciousness work, when I talk about forces, entities, energies, fields, and so forth, I want you to know that I have verified those by myself, all right? And I'm teaching other people from professions all over, the fields here, how to utilize this, how to become able to discern, to differentiate truth from untruth. Like what is yours, what isn't yours, what is dark, what is light. What could the practical purpose of that be? Well, think about it. In medicine, for instance, it can help you to identify or diagnose things in a different way. In psychology, it can help you to differentiate between delusion, mental illness, or energetic sensitivity, for instance. Each of these require completely different therapies or different treatments. In human resources, for instance, it can help you to make better matches, like an employee to a company. In relationships, it can help you to prevent toxic relationships, abusive kind of relationships, and so forth. In any kind of human interaction, really it can help you to differentiate what is good for you and what isn't, what helps you, what supports you, what is nurturing for you, or what degrades you, what like really contracts your energy. And as far as like the big question out here, namely the purpose of life, I think it's very important to illuminate these different dimensions of existence, because we typically tend to have a lot of clouds, a lot of confusion. So when somebody is asking themselves the question whether, what the purpose is, or who am I and what is my purpose here, it means that there is a lot of confusion, that there are a lot of clouds. And we call those, the blocks of perception. And there are mechanics of that. There are laws in that, how we can train ourselves to perceive things in a more true way, so that we can translate this into, say, making better choices, or manifesting higher vibratory goals, or liberating ourselves from things such as trauma, or pain that has accumulated in us that can also block us, as well as, of course, physical problems, or like right now, for instance, problems of the physical immune system. All right, so we can much better understand all these dynamics when we understand the dimensions of our own existence first. And I'm checking on your questions here real quick. Yes, I see all of you guys. Oh, so wonderful to have you here. Texas, Colorado, Illinois, Denver, Colorado. Yes, it's hard to decide between the different knowing, differentiating, and so forth, how to specify. Well, if it is hard for you to decide between those, then that means it is not quite yet clear. I mean, I did put them there in slashes because I do understand that there's different dimensions of understanding, different, layers of that, all right? And so as we are discussing the different dimensions of our existence here real quick, you'll see that there can be different dimensions of understanding and differentiating as well. So the first and probably most prevalent and aware form or dimension of existence that we have is obviously the physical, the 3D, the solid reality that we all have. And with it also ties in the psychological reality that we have, the mental, the intellectual, the cognitive, also our nervous system. All that is still tied to our body, as well as our emotions. Yes, I hate to say that, but our emotions, for the most part, not our feeling, but our emoting, is still linked to our 3D solid reality. Now, most of you guys know from science that this in and of itself is actually an illusion. I won't discuss this here today, but 98% of us is actually not solid. What we know from chemistry, physics, mathematics, and so forth. But we appear as solid. Why is this? Because we have other dimensions of existence, and all of them together then form this illusion of solidness, or the Maya, as some of the Vedic traditions call it. However, the physical, the 3D reality, guys, is tied to our ego and our ego reality. Why is that? Because the ego is the part in us that is responsible for our physical 3D survival. All right, without our ego, I want to point this out, we would not be able to really, exist here in this form without going nuts, or without committing suicide. This is really the part in us that allows us to develop a sense of self. And here we will see it becomes very complex, because the sense of self can express in different dimensions as well. So we can experience ourselves in form of our personality, in form of our demeanor, in form of our predispositions, but we can also experience ourselves due to, say, our true self or a false self. And those of us who have experience with energetic awareness and energetic sensitivity will also know that there is something like an etheric self, where you can experience yourself in a whole different way, which we will discuss here. It's important to understand dark and light forces, namely the realms that they exist in. And then we also have something like a spiritual soul self, all right, that also contributes to, this conglomerate of who we are, how we perceive ourselves, and, who we, represent here, how we self-actualize. And, one of the wonderful things here for us humans in this existence, and especially at this time, is that we are beginning to realize that the power of our consciousness allows us to permeate all four of these dimensions of existence, and that it, literally shows us the purpose of our existence right there, namely the unification, the self-unification of all of this, to bring all these four different dimensions of existence, or of self, if you will, together, to rejoin them. And why is that? Because there are, in the evolution of human consciousness, different stages that we had to go through, just like how we have to go through our physical 3D development, from infant to toddler to, elementary school, teenagehood, adolescence, and then into the mature, sort of grown up self. Our spiritual self here in this 3D reality also has to sort of grow into this, and there's different problems that come with this. Okay, so if we are tied to this physical and psychological reality, our ego reality only, okay, it creates fragments, or can create fragments, and different parts in us, all right, that cannot communicate with another. So, when you look at your spiritual reality, for instance, your perception, your beliefs, your mindsets, your intentions, and even your intuition, which, often leads to you having sort of hunches or true self-guidance, all right, how many times do you experience yourself, sort of as conflicted there, okay, where your ego says one thing and your inner guidance, your true self-guidance, says something else. Now, if you are energetically sensitive, or if you are trained in sort of traversing sort of inner and outer worlds, then you will also realize that the energetic, the etheric or astral reality of who you are, the multi-dimensional mirror self of you, all right, where also other entities and energy fields become visible. Your etheric self, so to speak, where that can be in a third and completely different expression of yourself. And then those of you who actually engage in consciousness training and truth training will realize that there's yet another way of experiencing ourselves. The self-witnessed observation through almost scientifically exploring what can be observed, say, through our own consciousness, through our own subjective and yet duplicatable perception. That there is another one, and there is a conscious soul self in you, all right? That if this and your etheric self and your true self and your ego self, if they are not communicating with another, if they are separate pieces in you, if they are separated, it can create a lot of pain, it can create a lot of unconscious manifestations and a lot of confusion here. So when we ask ourselves what the purpose is all of our existence, all right, who we are and what the purpose is, it always means, it always indicates that there is, a lack of inner fusion, or in other words, that there is a need to become more whole, to fusion that which is fragmented, which is split, and often also contradictive and self-destructively actually working against another. So this is, like a very sort of neutral way of, and obviously abbreviated. This is extremely complex and highly discussed in various different teachings. But this is the way it appears to me, and this is the way I can verify it myself. Now, there are some other, terms that I've just mentioned and related terms that come up with this. Namely, what is, this mirror world? What is this etheric, astral dimension of reality in which we can experience our etheric self? All right. The etheric and astral, and I'm putting them together here, which is not the way it is laid out in some of the traditional teachings. All right, the etheric and astral dimension of reality that is being discussed in all these ancient teachings and religions as well. There's a clear sort of hierarchies and so forth that we can read up even in the Bible or the Talmud or the the Quran and so forth, that can be observed in altered states of consciousness, through drugs or hallucinogenic or transpersonal kind of techniques, and also sometimes conscious or unconscious, accidental, through OBEs, out of body experiences. So if you browse the YouTube and stuff, and people talking about astral and traveling and stuff like that, they are basically talking about the etheric or the astral reality and the astral reality of your own etheric self. Now, the energetic reality, which I've already mentioned here, is more of a self-witnessed observation, and this which requires a certain level of consciousness. It requires the discernment of truth before one can actually set out to do this, because in these etheric and astral realms are a lot of different entities and energies that are, and now we're getting to the core of this lecture here, really, that are either faking, disguising, holding in secret, or degrading, or transfiguring truth. In other words, there's a lot of enemies out there, okay, in this world, and many of you have experienced those kind of I want to say energies, dark energies, what you call them, that are sort of lingering in the astral and etheric worlds, through dream states, for instance, or through hallucinogenics, through ayahuasca is very popular for the last 20 years, to experience, to actually witness this yourself, but also, the recent hype around marijuana really points at people either wanting to experience it or no longer wanting to experience it, and trying to learn about it. Brief checkup here with your guys' questions. Yes, Grace Denise, you are asking a very important question, namely whether fragmentation is darkness, and I'm getting to this now. Namely, what is it actually, that makes things appear, okay, to us, all right? Like, how do we perceive energies? How do we, experience them themselves? And for the most part, it's a subjective thing, so it feels differently for each and every one of us. And this is what truth training always begins, namely the differentiation of, physical sensations, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, intentions, and so forth. Because for as long as we don't really know the difference between them, it's very difficult for us to actually know, where our center point is, where we are here in the whole thing, which means without knowing where the center of our center is, we cannot relate to all these different identifications of ourselves, and which leads to most people, living in a sleep state, in an unconscious state. So an unconscious state is when we identify ourselves with these thoughts and emotions and physical sensations only, all right? And when the way we perceive the world is through the ego's eyes only, is, this fixation on 3D and only what is real. Now, in energy work, we know that everything can and does appear as real. Everything is real, really. But that doesn't mean that everything is true. And therefore, these untrained or, disfigured, spiritual, esoteric truths that are, that people have cultivated here through this 90% untruth, internet and so forth, source of information, without the ability to discern this, are very unconscious and very dangerous explorations. They lead a person often into, what we call sort of the lower astral worlds, which are very dense, and they're very much tied into the collective unconscious. Okay, Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious. And there's a lot of things that we can encounter there. Some of you, have experience with this, and others of you are more afraid of it and would rather not to know anything about this, so I don't want to trigger you here. But, things like ghosts and spirits and phantoms, phantoms are very, very common manifestations of our own shadow self. So those are like these little shadows that follow us around, right? But also lower demons, things that the collective sort of manifests as, like, say, the current fear clouds, the corona fear cloud, those actually can be visible there and can be experienced in the lower astral realms as lower type of demons. But also trapped souls, or fragmented soul aspects of people who are no longer in 3D. And the largest group of what we encounter here, really, in these lower astral realms when we're unconscious, are the astral versions of our own ego projections. Now, this is a huge topic, ego projections. So right now, by the way, we are having a energy awareness training intensive here at transCODES to teach people how to differentiate and how to feel the difference between a projection and a vision, inner guidance and illusion, and so forth. But really, all I'm talking about here is the energetic quality of something that we are experiencing. And when we are very fragmented, when we are sort of split within, when there are a lot of schisms within ourselves, be it just within, I mean, we all, have a lot to do with our 3D schisms already, but there are much more dimensions of our schisms, which also reflect, obviously, here into the lower astral realm, into our spiritual reality, okay, and also in the energetic, sort of overall, sort of neutral balance of things, all right? And that's where the biggest problem for people is, namely to understand that things such as shadow or trauma, that those are all highly fragmenting, highly schismatic events that can happen to us in 3D or karmically, and literally create energy fields, energies, or even entities in us. So this is where some of these myths come from that, and I talk a lot about this, and maybe that hasn't really been so clear in the past, because I've never really shared what I'm sharing here today. But what we perceive sort of as inner demons, okay, the inner darkness, in the energetic reality and also in the etheric reality, they can be observed in and around a person. All right, but it's way more complex than that, because New Age, this transfigured way of fake positivity and just believing in the higher vibratory realm, cutting ourselves off from our 3D and no longer believing in 3D and so forth, has created an equally dangerous untruth, namely not only that, we don't have to do anything, everything is being sorted out for us, which also externalizes our powers in a very dangerous way, but it has also created the false idea that all that darkness doesn't even exist, okay? And if there is darkness, then it's your own darkness. And it isn't that easy, guys. This is a very unsophisticated way of seeing that. Because when you actually look at the energetic reality of things and the quality of things, you'll see that there is a very distinct that there are very distinct levels of quality that can actually also be measured. So Dr. Hawkins here has delivered wonderful tools for this in the last 50 years. Through this increase in energetic perception and energetic awareness in people now, we are able to verify this in different ways. That's how I'm able to teach this to people and duplicate this, all right, for others. You don't have to have a certain skill. It's everybody can learn this. But the main thing to understand here when it comes to really wanting to fully understand energies and energy fields and the quality of energies, then you first have to understand that energies are constantly changing, they're constantly transforming, but they always maintain a certain balance. But the one part that we, like from Star Wars and so forth, we're familiar with those kind of concepts in that sort of simplistic way, but it's way more complex, because when you add different dimensions to it, which our mental or cognitive brain isn't possible to perceive, all right, then you will also find out that there is a two-way aspect of this, that everything is mirrored in the other, and that actually everything is connected. So this is where some of these esoteric or New Age concepts, where they are true, but where they don't really hit the truth level of what is being said, namely fully understanding what that means, what the meaning of that is. All right. So there is a truth in saying you become what you hold in mind. And I also go as far as say or telling, teaching people, what you feel is what you get, is what you are. That is correct. So in that way, we have a lot of influence on what we manifest and on whatever dimension of existence is in our sort of perception. But what this doesn't inform a person about is how to actually harness that, how to actually move into one's inner higher power and have the freedom of choice, how to consciously choose what it is that you want to manifest, what it is that you are, that you become. And so here is where, the consciousness training and so forth comes in, because it allows or also forces a person, the truth seeker, to become fully aware of, for instance, the influence of their own ego, the influence of their own trauma, of their own shadow, of their own addictions, of their own self-deceit, of their own lies, of, all that. So, not that you think that truth training is, an easy peasy thing. This is probably the hardest journey that you ever undertake here in this lifetime, and probably also the most life-changing, and not just life-changing, also, effective in other realms of your existence, which I get to here in a little bit. So you can see that this is a very complex matrix, not the matrix, it's a matrix of dimensions, and it requires us to shift our perception away from this binary, sort of linear way of processing things with our brain based on good or bad. Okay, so good or bad is part of the ego duality. Okay, however, and this is the beauty of this arduous truth training, that once you are able to discern truth and you really know what is, and this is here the part where I want you to pay a lot of attention, what is life promoting for you, which equals truth, and what is life degrading or life destructive for you, which is the most simplest way of defining truth from falsehood or truth from untruth. All right, then you begin to see the world, yourself, your purpose, and your mission, your quest, in a whole new way. You begin to understand that your purpose here is basically a way of fulfilling the promise that you've made to your own soul, unified soul self, your divine self, if you will, to bring yourself into the highest expression here in this lifetime. And the more you go through this truth training in the course of your lifetime, all right, and here, those of you who don't believe in reincarnation, please don't feel offended, but it is recorded. Many of you have heard about Akashic records. I don't want to go into these terms, but I do want to confirm for you that everything is recorded. Everything is visible here in these energetic realms of existence. Nothing is unrecorded. All right. That's also the reason why I've made statements, before, where I said liars can't heal. Why is that? Because for as long as we are in untruth with ourselves and others, our different dimensions of existence are too fragmented, which leads to a very, very little chance of healing. It can always happen to us through interventions, either true self interventions or soul self interventions, or also interventions of other beings or entities, that we experience a sudden shift in consciousness that then suddenly allows us to see truth. This can also happen through collective events, and this is basically the interpretation of the event that we are in here currently. This massive collective transformation that is now manifested through this pandemic event, all right? Because it polarizes us humans, okay? It bifurcates us and shows us, what we are capable of. We are either unconscious, meaning that we are just basically under the influence of these collective energies, this collective fear cloud, lower vibratory energies are energies that are based on untruths. Okay, and not to say that any of what, I'm not being political here. I'm just saying that, the quality of the corona situation is untruth, all right, and those who are seeing the the larger perspective here and the opportunity to grow into, a higher level of consciousness, and with it, also, or through it, a higher degree of inner fusion, of inner healing, who see this as, sort of the impulse to go into more truth with themselves, and, as a result of that, into more self-healing. Okay. There are, of course, and this is basically the core of our topic here, certain qualities that we can perceive, that we can feel. And I want to show you basically here, for yourself to verify the difference between, light and dark. Okay, and dark defined here as untruth, as something that does not have the quality to promote healing, to promote life, to promote, your growth, your evolution. Whereas untruth, subdues it, subjugates it, polarizes it, lies about it, distorts it, transfigures it, degrades it, defames it, disguises, okay, cheats, hides, is phony. Fake positivity is also the form of darkness, is dogmatic, uses propaganda, uses subjugation, as I've already, is binding in its nature, and often also rigid and mechanic. And these, dark energies, these untrue energies, they can come forward through many different things here in our 3D reality, and I want to just point out at you like how prevalent they actually are. They come forward in form of injustice, in form of sometimes also social conventions, right? Sort of the fakeness that we all have, but also in form of offensive and defensive forces here, projections, incongruences, like everything that is contradictive, everything that is polarizing, that is increasing, inner opinions and polarizations, really is, based on darkness. It's based on untruth, and therefore makes us unfree. It's, often also addictive. It's infringing. It's contaminating. It feels dense. It promotes scarcity, a fear of losing something, a fear of dying, obviously. It promotes, sort of simple, instant gratification. It promotes judging, and it promotes self-destruction. That is what a dark energy is, guys. Okay. And now coming back to your question, Grace Denise, whether a fragmentation is dark or dark, darkness. We have to be careful here with how we call this. Well, it depends. But for the most part, yes. For most people, yes. For those people who, amongst us who are unaware of their own inner fragmentations, their own schisms, their own incongruences, their own inner lies, all right, it actually does manifest in form of darkness, and that can be observed in the etheric, in the astral, and in the energetic reality of things. Now then, you might ask, what are light forces? What are light, forces, the energies of the light, okay? They're always based on truth, okay? Because truthfulness, guys, and this is something that you can all feel. When something is true, it forms a form of resonance. It invites you in. It's inclusive. It makes you feel something like an inner peace. It feels whole. It feels uplifting, perhaps. It makes you feel equal. There's no, there's an absence of inferiority or superior. There's an absence of judgment. It feels non-judgmental. It feels unconditional. It feels uniting. It feels free. It feels liberating. It feels mending. It feels transcending, expansive and empowering, allowing, revealing. It feels neutral in and of itself, but it does these things to us. It creates abundance in us. And as opposed to instant gratification, It comes more as a quality of inner saturation. It saturates us. It fills us up. It doesn't split us up. It fills us up. And, from an energetic point of view, it also leads to self-clearing and self-healing, to energetic hygiene. Versus darkness leads to contamination. Okay? Now, the energetic reality reveals that, what we latch onto, or what we feed, what we energize in ourselves, all right, determines the energetic alignment that we have. That's the sort of it's the filter, if you will, all right? And that then becomes part of our compass, of our navigation system. And the problem with this being tied to the 3D only, to the material only, so the physical, emotional, mental only, and I want to emphasize here that this also applies to the mentalism, all right, that we can currently observe. Not just the materialism, but also the mentalism is an expression of being tied to ego reality and materialism. All right, that then, determines how we perceive our reality. And within that ego reality, guys, we're literally seeing ourselves as as a bag of meat, all right, that, goes through the different stages of development and then dies, poofs away. All right, it's very, reduced, okay, to being a consumer, being a producer, and things like that, having to function. All right, this is also where a lot of the performance anxiety comes from, that you guys have, because you see yourselves just as this ego being of this 3D ego being that has to function like a machine, like a computer. And some of you who are a little more intelligent, you see yourselves as a bag of meat, basically a body with a soul. So your soul is somewhere out there, and it's a different part of you. It's still separated. Now then there's the New Agers and the woo-woo guys, who say, well, no, I'm just a soul. I'm only light and I'm no body. No, I cut myself off from my body, from my emotions, from my psychology, and I just negate that even exists, which is just as ego reality and untrue, because, and I will get to this, when we get to the hierarchy of dark forces and light forces, because it binds us to this, fragmented, dualistic, good or bad, black or white, either or, all or nothing type of perception. So that's one of the main qualities of your ego reality. And when that is your navigation system, then yes, the world then appears as a very scary, hostile place. And no wonder that we get caught in fear and that we energize that then. But you got to understand that that's a self-perpetuating downward spiral. Now, when we discover or, come into experiencing it ourselves, our energy awareness, then we can actually begin to, see through some of these veils of illusion, of ego illusion, the Maya, right? We begin to learn how to increase our inner vocabulary. It starts with, the differentiation between sensations, emotions, thoughts, and no longer identifying with it. And then we can learn to harness this so that we can more freely navigate through these different dimensions of existence, through these inner and outer worlds, with a higher degree of awareness and the freedom to make conscious choices. So this is how a lot of people actually arrive here in this sort of spiritual awakening. It's not so much a sort of dogmatic or this practical or modern spirituality is no longer really bound to dogmas or religions for most of you, which is a good thing. That's a sign of evolution. All right, but it doesn't mean that we have to vilify everything that was there before. Okay, after all, that's part of our genesis here. But being unconscious, and I want to really point this out, is not exactly the same as being unaware or asleep. Okay, so we can be unconscious of things because we simply don't have the skill or the tool or the ability to discern yet. Being unaware or being asleep is more like, sort of unconsciously choosing through not choosing, all right, a reality that is not congruent with your own energetic reality. Okay, so you choose, any addiction, any, like escapism, fantasy worlds or delusion and so forth, but also projections and so forth. They bind you to, your sort of ego reality, with all the inner decor, that you give it, specialness, idealization, and so forth. Also the vilification of things, like calling everything dark. But it's dominated by your unconscious energetic contaminations, that make it impossible for that person to evolve. And the long-term effect here, in regards to like the entire collective and also your own sort of evolution here, is quite detrimental, because it creates not only these fragments throughout your lifetime, it also, manifests in energetic or etheric or astral fragments, and kind of, sort of separates itself off, okay, and becomes, one of these entities, okay, becomes one of these beings, these lower astral beings, these demon beings, these ghosts, and so forth. And this now leads me to, really looking at the hierarchy of beings and entities here with you, which is a huge sort of, next topic. Again, it's impossible, of course, to lay this all out for you in 1 hour here. And I see that there's more and more questions coming. Let me just reflect on your questions. What is the difference between good and bad versus light and dark? I feel they are together in my mind. Yes, Ram, and that's why it's a good question. This is the duality that I've mentioned earlier. Light and dark, and good and bad, and black and white, and all or nothing, they all stem out of your ego reality, which is a simplified binary version of reality. Okay, it's like two factions, okay, clashing against another, expressing in our entire ego psychology and behaviors, and also in our energetic reality. So light and dark, from an energetic point of view, is much simpler and much more complex at the same time, because there really is only light, and then there is nothingness. Okay, and so darkness is really, from a very naive spiritual point of view, the absence of light. And this makes it, clear to the beginning truth seeker that, fighting the dark is actually an oxymoron, because you can't fight the absence of something. All right. But for those who have a bit more inner understanding of what I'm talking about, you'll realize that, so if darkness is the absence of light, what would be the antidote to darkness? It would be light, filling something up with light, filling a space or a field or, myself up with light. And that would be correct. You are now on the path to finding out why I talk so much about truth. What is truth? What is this sort of truth in our mythologies all over the world or throughout the history of mankind? It is truth as light. So light brings truth, okay? And this is how I, came to the differentiation between light and dark in this sort of less contaminated terminology as truth and untruth. Okay, so if you look at light as truth and dark as the absence of truth, okay, untruth. All right, not necessarily falsehood, because falsehood is a different version of untruth, but, just to keep it simple here for us, those are studies that one can undertake. I mean, I have been studying this for over 30 years, and I've been working on my PhD for almost 10 years now, so, there's no end to discovering other dimensions of this. There's always another level of this. But yes, to move into light really means to move into truth with oneself, and then these differences between good and bad, they disappear. It is basically what we call here, at least in Christian-oriented societies, Christ consciousness, okay, or Christ light. It is the unifying energy, all right, that takes out the judgment, that takes out the separation, that takes out the duality, that sees it all as connected, and that mends what was separated, that brings light into where there is darkness. Okay, so I want you guys to understand that enlightenment is really, not something that is bestowed onto you. It's a very long-term process here that can last over several thousand lifetimes, okay, of bringing truth into your awareness. I hope this is satisfying here, Sheila. I don't know how to ask this question coming in, but how do I know if I'm part of mirroring something back to someone, or am I experiencing their mirroring back onto me? This is a cool question, Sheila. It tells me that you have already been sort of become familiar with the concepts or the mechanics of energetic projection, and that that things are, sort of in constant, that they constantly exist on all these different levels of existence. And the simple answer to your question is when you stand in your center. When you stand in your center and you are in truth, and you are in truth, and you know that you exist, and you know that you're conscious, then you will know it. And that needs to be trained. That's the process of truth training. Shifting from taking to giving, Denise, is something that plays into this here in our behavior, okay, and also our value system. But it's not that simple, because in the energetic reality of things, there is a constant offering and a constant presenting. There's a constant presence. So it's more like a choosing and offering. That's how I would like to or offer you to reframe this, as opposed to taking and giving, or giving and receiving. It's really neither one. It's a constant offering. Okay. The alignment determines our reality. Thank you. This clicked here for you in this topic. Okay, cool. Yeah. So then let's answer probably here one of the. If I look back at the questions that you wanted me to cover here today, what is truth training? I covered that. What is spiritual transfiguration specialist? Not yet. So we're going to talk about that. We talked about the energetic reality of us humans and what kind of entities can be observed and how to differentiate them. Then let's look at the hierarchy of beings and entities. So you've already, now heard that there are different kinds of energies and entities that manifest on different levels or different dimensions of existence. So let's back up a little bit and go back to something that we can, at least for ourselves, verify. We can all, I'm hoping, that you as this audience here today is able to feel something like energies. You feel something like a field. And in a field, whenever we talk about an energy field, guys, we talk about something that becomes a little more dense. This can be due to your alignment. This can be due to a lot of different people coming together with the same alignment. We often also talk about resonance, but that describes the interaction, how they relate, how different fields relate with another. I often like to compare energy fields with sort of weather systems, with like high pressure, low pressure areas, and the dynamics between them is very similar to the energetic dynamics, really. So in the Earth's atmosphere, there's a constant movement, constant change, but one affects the other, and so forth. There's trajectories. There's, like Gulf Stream and things like that. That affects the temperature. The temperature affects the humidity. The humidity affects the clouds. The clouds then move, and then they rain down somewhere else where it affects the humidity there, and so forth. So this is how, in my way of simplifying things, how you can imagine energies the best. And when you have, like, say, a really, really strong storm, like a really, really intense, low weather system, okay, then that begins to form very, very dense clouds. That's how we see the clouds as dark, okay? So dark clouds are extremely dense, culminations, all right, of, I don't want to go into what clouds consist of, but you get me here, I assume. All right, and so is, the light that comes in, the sunlight is the internet that can dissipate the whole thing again, but sometimes they begin to form dynamics that can no longer be stopped. Good examples are, sort of spin-offs such as tornadoes or hurricanes that create, huge weather systems that can influence the weather, the energy in an entire on an entire continent. All right, and this is how you can also see the energetic power of different beings and entities. Okay, some of their power is very local, is just like really right right there, and some of them have they either were created or existed through sort of collective density about a certain subject, such as right now, Corona is an extremely dense subject. If you think about it, nobody talked about it 3 months ago, and right now it's dominating everything. The information flow here, our own thinking, our own emoting, and also our own bodies. So that's an extremely big power. Okay, and this is then also where we need to ask ourselves, well, how did this come into existence, right? That's why we have so many conspiracy theories and so forth, because we have to ask ourselves is, what has the power to literally stop our life, stop our economy, everything here on this planet in this way? That's then when a lot of conspiracy theories or religions or so pop up and say, oh yeah, and it's this entity and that entity and that entity. So I want to offer you a view here, just based on the energetic reality and the energetic power that something has. So everything basically operates in form of energy fields, they through resonance, and then other energetic dynamics such as coherence and synergy and so forth, entropy as well as syntropy. Those are all sort of metaphysical concepts that you can read articles that I've published on my blog or watch videos on YouTube where I'm explaining this. But really, they form, they're part of what forms lower astral beings and entities, or what is manifested through them. But there is one thing that I want to really, really sink in for you today, and that is that regardless of what kind of hierarchy of entities and beings you believe in, whether you believe in angels, demons, or changels, as I've called them in the energy tips here for all you who are interested in my weekly energy tips on Patreon, changels. So those are like these little transforming, deceiving energies in between. All right, but the hierarchy of these energetic densities, or these energetic fields that can have different kinds of powers, really goes like this. Okay, so we have these lower astral beings and the entities that exist here in our collective unconscious and in our own sort of astral field, aura, if you will. Those are all terms that are mixed together, and I'm using them in yet another way, but I want you to just sort of follow me here. Okay, most of those are actually energetic contamination. So those are things that you've absorbed, or also things that you've produced as your own ego reality projections onto others. And in that context, it's completely irrelevant whether they came from you or whether they came from somebody else. I hope that answers the question. It only matters what you align yourself to. It only matters what you energize, what you feed, what you hold on to. How do we know this? Well, this is what we can observe here in energy healing, energy reading. For instance, what does the person hold on to? Where can we verify this ourselves if we don't even have, that training yet? Often in our dreams. Okay, so in our dreams, in our sleep state, something very important happens, namely something that we would call like a self-clearing, a self-regeneration of things. But if we are holding on to things, if we are too dense and if there's not, if there's too much untruth there, then the mechanisms of this regenerations get reversed. So instead of clearing ourselves from these energetic contaminations, okay, so an energetic contamination is a lower vibratory energy or residue that we pick up and that we create every day, and it functions, in form of filters, selection, distortion of our reality through our ego perception, and it makes it impossible for us or harder for us to see or discern truth as the experiencer. Okay, so unbeknownst then to the experiencer, to the ego self, these it literally messes or manipulates the reality, and with it the energetic quality of not just what is perceived, but also of the person themselves, of the perceiver, him and herself, and thus determines a person's consciousness level. And the lower the conscious level, the sort of more dark these entities are that form within a person. Okay, hear me out here. Okay, how do I know this? Because when they go into like sleep state, say, where your mental brain, where your ego brain, sort of stops, and where your autonomous nervous system and your blood and everything that has to do with your metabolism basically is regenerated. Okay, these energies are also being regenerated. And the lower the consciousness level of a person, okay, the less independent this person can do that. In other words, and this is the good news here, the higher the conscious level of a person, the more independently and more purposefully, namely, consciously, the person can do this. And again here, when we're unconscious, we have a high level of energetic contamination. It doesn't just filter and distort and make it even harder for us to see truth. It also makes our own energy field become more dense, more fragmented, more schismatic, and more possessed. Because this energetic contamination that we pick up every day is basically like a sort of a mini possession that we all have. It's like, I like to compare it with viruses and bacteria, because just because we see them or not see them doesn't mean that they exist or not. They're always there. Okay, and when you begin to see these things, through truth training, then it's a bit shocking at first, because you realize how much is attached to you and how much you really need to clear on a regular basis, sort of as energetic hygiene. But it has that sort of self-propelling effect, either in direction of truth and healing, or untruth and self-destruction. Okay, so truth and untruth then determine whether an energy field or entity is of lower or higher vibratory nature. Lower vibratory nature and lower nature. Darker nature is life-degrading, contractive, dense, stagnating, unfree, destructive, or even self-destructive, and higher is life force promoting, liberating, freeing, expansive, inspiring, healing, and self-healing. All right, and whether this regeneration process while you sleep goes into the direction of producing more truth, more light, or more darkness in you, that depends on sort of your level of contamination. And this is a question that I have been getting here over the past weeks over and over again. I've already talked about it, like sort of on the surface with the corona nightmares. Inner energies are being cleared, integrated, and regenerated when we sleep or when we meditate. When our etheric loosens the ties to our body, ego, and also soul self. All right, but if this happens in an unconscious way, and the degree of contamination through all these dense outer energies is very high, then what happens is that they, instead of sort of self-clear neutralizing themselves, they split up, as entities. And this is what we often see here as lower astral, fantastical being as well. It's very, very deceiving, lying all these attributes, these qualities of untruth. Okay, so that's why, like visioning is a very tricky thing if you don't know what you're doing, because for the most part you probably get stuck in your own sort of lower astral, and that, of what the people around you or what you believe in or what you align yourself to produces for you. Now, luckily, we all have a true self, and the true self in us is the part that permeates the membranes between those different dimensions of existence, okay? And it can inform us about the quality of energies through inner guidance or sometimes even intervention. And that can be practiced by anybody. This is what I do here every month since 8 years. Connect with your true self. Go into this inner communication with your own true self. If you will, it is a form of an entity. It is an entity really in this etheric reality. And the more congruent, you become with your true self, the more congruent your true self also becomes with your etheric self. And the more congruent your etheric self becomes to who you truly are and your soul self and, what you came here to do and so forth, the higher the degree of freedom, on all levels, and abundance, and the lower the contamination, because you're now forming a natural shield due to the increased state of fusion, the increased state of healing. So now you understand, why it's so difficult to discern all these different things. And when we talk about the hierarchy of beings, which I haven't even started yet, then you need to learn that, or you need to learn to differentiate what is yours and what isn't first. It doesn't matter, again here, it doesn't matter where it originally came from. All that matters is whether you align yourself, whether you feed it, whether you energize it or not, because then it becomes yours. So, excuse me, whatever, your ego latches onto, or that your unconscious or whatever part in you latches onto things, now it's yours. Doesn't matter where it came from. If it were projections, propaganda, collective things, phantoms of your own shadow self, lower demons, influences, that beyond your control, doesn't matter. But let's talk real quick here before we come to the end, because we're over time already. What are these entities or energies that can control, say, the collective, okay, that can control the way, energies sort of move and traverse and how they're being perceived? And this is where we get into, some of the different mystic schools, that have very intricate hierarchies. I don't want to get into this, but I do want to discuss with you here real quick the two most important groups, namely sort of what is like devil, Lucifer, Satan, and so forth, and what are angels, archangels, creator, divine, source energies. Real quick. Becky, I'm seeing your question. When the energetic contamination is regenerated during sleep, is this why we wake up feeling so heavy and dense? There can be many reasons for feeling, physically heavy and dense. But a lot of times when we have been sort of out there and our etheric self, has sort of separated from our, like when we go into this lower astral place, and then it feels a bit heavy when we come back. But it can also mean many other things. It can also mean that you're undergoing a physical restructuring, which is ultimately what we're all going through here in this big time of transformation. I mean, our body and our etheric and our entire sort of all dimensions of self, they need to be prepared for the higher vibratory existence And so many of us, especially the energetically sensitives, experience a lot of physical restructuring during sleep, which means we wake up and we feel like run over by a truck. Okay, sometimes it's just a sign that, you know, your etheric self is not all the way back yet, and this is then when we suggest to people that they ground, that they ground their energies, that they center their energies. I am breathing, you know, conscious breathing, as I recommended so many times, is one of the fastest way to really find into your center of centers, to find into your own 0 point again. You know, and that's then also really how you can prevent, you know, dark forces from latching on even more so. It's basically like the more contaminated you are, the better fodder you become. Okay, so the more, you know, come in due to the power, you know, the energetic quality of resonance. Okay, but what are the forces here behind this? What are the forces of dark and light at all? And you know, in most of the mythology and ancient teachings and so forth, we have, you know, some kind of like god or deities, and then we have sort of the antagonists, you know, the entities that work against it. I don't want to go into all of this. I've said this already, but I do want to make a big distinction here for you that most people are unaware of, and that is that not everything is the devil. Okay, not everything is Satan. You know, the anti-light or the anti-Christ. Okay, there are different hierarchies of dark forces, you know, that play sort of into that, or that are under the influence of dark forces. And there's also a lot of people on this planet that are under the influence of this dark force or dark forces. Okay, and this is where your whole understanding of the world needs to be expanded, because when we talk about energies, we're talking about the effects of these energies on us, on our 3D reality, right? And there's a differentiation here. For me, and this is something that I have basically learned through studying the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, the biggest fallacy here for us, you know, or anti-light, untruth within ourselves at this day and age, is the belief that we are just a material, that we are just a 3D solid being, that we have to function like a machine and so forth. I can see this also through the study of science. Okay, that this at this very moment is the strongest influence that I would call satanic. Okay, because it separates us even more from our etheric self. It separates us more from our own spiritual reality and our soul self, and leads to this empty shell, these zombies walking around here on this planet, not knowing who they are, why they came here for, like as if they've taken a forgetting potion, all right, and just think they have to be sort of drones, you know, or part of a hive, you know, functioning every day. So that to me is the manifestation really of satanic forces here in today's day and age. Okay, now there is the Lucifer, which is also not exactly the same as Satan. It just through different translations, different languages, you know, end up being the same in most people's minds, but they are afraid of it anyway, so they never really investigate this any further. But you know, Lucifer, the light bringer, you know, is not actually Satan. It is under the influence of the devil, in that it creates, and now listen carefully, because this applies to all of New Age and you know, light worker and love and light brigade sort of factions here in the world. It creates the illusion that we are only our spiritual self, that we are only some kind of etheric light being and not in 3D, and that we can just ignore our bodies and our emotions and cut them off, and that they are lower and that they are all dark. This is just as dark, guys. Gotta understand that. This is where some of my sarcasm, my cynicism sometimes comes in. Okay, because that's not true either. Just as untrue. And when it comes to untruth, yeah, there's different densities of untruths, but a lie is a lie. There is no just a little bit of lie. Okay, and again here, this is why, I say harsh statements like liars can't heal, because, you can't just lie a little bit. Everything gets recorded. Your etheric self, your spiritual self, your true self, they know when you're not true with yourself. That your body knows it, your emotion, everything in you knows it. What do you think your critical inner voice is? Yes, it's, the superego part is a recorded, mostly tapes that are playing, to do with conditioning and so forth. But it's also part of your inner darkness, your inner lies. Okay, so the ego is not all bad. It's there to inform you about your inner lies as well. Where do we see this in the bigger picture of things? The bigger picture of things is our karma. So every time we lie, every time we go into untruth, we create something that needs to be undone, and that creates karma, and whether you believe in incarnations or not, but that's what creates sort of these propensities that you experience in your life, the repetitions, the Groundhog Day, the stagnation, and often also the descent. Now, what about angels, archangels, creator, source, and so forth? We can see them, guys. They exist in the energetic reality. We know that angels exist. Beings, helper beings, supporting beings. They're not all what you think, okay? Yes, they do appear to our collective unconscious in this archetypal version with wings a lot of times and so forth. But, if we lived on a different planet, if we had a different kind of awareness, they would probably feel or see, look differently. Anyway, this regeneration that I talked about, when you go into a meditative state or when you sleep, all right, in this day and age, cannot happen independently yet. We do not have the sophistication, the consciousness level to do this all by ourselves. So there are beings out there that help us with this. This is why people feel that they are being worked on at night. Okay, and this is actually the case. The only problem is if you don't know what you're being worked on, you might as well being, seduced or, sort of possessed by, these dark energies. So again, this goes back to the discernment of truth, and this is something that I teach in etheric protection, and right now in navigating your energies, namely how to ask, how to find out if something is a dark being or a light being. Okay, this can be learned. All right. The simple answer here is that you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know its name. You need to call it out, and that creates a form of light, through that truth of calling out that name, that forms a shield for you, that forms your etheric immune system. Okay, so you have to learn how to discern beings, in your dream state, in your meditations. Okay, this is then what lucid dreaming and so forth, truly what the purpose of that is. This is the purpose of higher learning, of meta learning, remote energy training and so forth, all the things that I have dedicated my work to. Okay, so archangels are higher beings of that, and they have certain power over, the human collective for certain times, reigns, if you will. And, they bring in different qualities. And right now, it's the quality, it's the power of truth, the sword of truth, all right, that we are all basically sort of receive as the supporting light resonances here, the healing resonances, what we can sometimes see maybe as Archangel Michael, like bringing in the sword, but also bringing in, the balance of things, okay? The scale, the balance, the neutrality, the unconditionality, and so forth. And we can also see, energies that are so, illuminating and radiant that it's hard to really contain. It typically makes us spontaneously cry when we feel them, that we could call divine energies or source. Source, there's obviously differentiations there. Here within the transCODES energy training, we call them grace. Okay, the grace not in the religious sense, but grace in the way it feels within ourselves. So I do need to come to an end here right now, but I do want to make sure that for this part one, you understand truth training and consciousness work, as I've used this here, okay, as a form of higher learning, a combination of energy and consciousness training, self-discovery, mindfulness, and higher self-actualization via learning, verifying, internalizing, okay, to experience and to deal with your own false perceptions and projections, all right? So that you can learn how to bypass these attachments, these fragments, these contaminations, these energies created through your inner ego illusion, which then helps you to reduce unconscious energetic, contamination or, exposure, and allows you to become more skillful and educated and, more free in manifesting, this or fulfilling this promise to your soul self to bring yourself into higher expression here, okay? And ultimately also needs to be pointed out, raising the overall consciousness level of humanity, increasing higher vibes. Yes, I do have to come to an end. The question here that there's only one last question. Gloria is asking, as you heal aspects of yourself, be it in wake state, and truth is being in the state, clear yourself naturally, or do you always need to consciously clear energies? Oh, okay. So I guess what you were asking is whether or not the clearing of dark energies happens without proceeds, or whether it's something that you actually consciously have to do. The answer is pretty clear. Because we all still have an ego reality, because we all still have that temptation, that sort of devilish or, Ahriman, as some call them, temptation to the material and the reduction of ourselves, we can never really fully trust our ego reality, and therefore I suggest that you always make this in a conscious state. And a conscious state means nothing but the I am state, the state in which you know that you exist and you are awake right now, and you can do the clearing, the self-clearing and self-healing consciously. When you are aware that you're doing it, that is when it happens, okay? As you, develop a higher levels of integrity and higher levels of consciousness, your energy develops higher levels of etheric immunity. And these entities and energies, low energies, are no longer interested in you because it's way too hard to deal with you, okay? You have the sword of truth and the shield, of your own love. So you don't, you're literally getting less exposed to it, and you no longer really attract so much of that into your life. But you still are, for as long as you are bound to 3D here in your existence, in that part of your existence, you can never be 100% sure. So I, as you know, always suggest that people do this as part of their regular energetic hygiene, their regular routines. And this is where regular meditating and energy training and, conscious awareness, present moment awareness, where that comes in. It can be a matter of a few seconds, to clear yourself. It's not, rocket science. And I share all this here for free, guys. I mean, obviously I have lots of paid sessions, and I have very expensive programs, for the serious seekers. But it's not a secret, guys. Secrecy is untruth. All right. And if I would keep anything a secret, I would, basically support darkness, which I don't. I have everything open. You can ask any question, and there is no, judgment of that. All right. But if you really want to learn how to apply this and experience, internalize this all for yourself, that requires obviously a lot of expertise and guidance. So that's where I come in as an energy coach. I bring in, the assimilated guidance of my own experience, my own realization, my own consciousness level. All right, to hold the torch for you, if you will, while you're doing this, and keep you safe energetically as well. Yes, and here I want to announce part 2 next Sunday, and I've decided to invite Jeff Casper. Jeff is known as a professional energy clearer. He's also the one that does the trainings here for transCODES, for the the energy healers that want to specialize on energetic clearing, on fighting the dark and dealing with the dark and light entities on a clearing basis, to invite him to an interview next time. And we're going to talk about self-clearing and how to do certain things and how to deal with certain kinds of entities and energies next Sunday. So I hope you guys share this. I hope you guys come, understand that this is what it means, to offer truth, to be a true self radio. Thank you so much for your support, guys. Check out transCODES website or whatever if you're interested in more. I'm looking forward to sharing more with you every week, and see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.